Before the world there was a sound, not a word, not a voice, something older than either. The groan of ice under pressure, the deep crack of a glacier carving into dark water, and beneath it the roar of a fire so vast it had no edge, no origin, no name. These two forces had been there since before there existed as a concept. Ice to the north, fire to the south, and between them a void. The Norse called it Ginnungagap. Say that word slowly and it does something to the air. Ginnungagap, the yawning void. Not mere darkness. Darkness is simply the absence of light, and that is too small a thing to describe what this was. Ginnungagap was the absence of everything, of ground and sky and time, a silence so complete it had no edges, a nothing so total it made the universe feel for a moment as though it had never quite earned the right to exist. And yet the tradition tells us that this nothing was not still. It was charged. Something was building. Something that the world had no word for yet, because the world did not yet exist. The clearest account of what lay on either side of that void comes to us from Snorri Sturluson, the Icelandic scholar who wrote the prose Edda around 1220 CE, a synthesis drawn from an oral tradition already centuries old and written down by a Christian scholar, looking back at the cosmological beliefs of his ancestors. Snorri gives us a clean and elegant architecture. To the north, Niflheim, a realm of ice and mist, its rivers called the Eilivagar, flowing outward from a central spring and carrying their frost into Ginnungagap. To the south, Muspelheim, a realm of fire and sparks, its guardian Sorter standing at its border with a flaming sword, its heat radiating outward across the void. The older poems of the poetic Edda, fragments of a tradition much harder to systematize, paint a messier picture, one in which the void itself is the beginning and the fire and ice its conditions rather than its borders. But in every telling, the principle is the same. Two opposites meeting in the dark. Where they met, the ice began to melt, and from the melting, from the first drops of water warmed into something more than frost and less than flame, the first being formed. His name was Ymir. He was not a god. The Norse tradition is precise about this distinction. Ymir was a giant, Jotun, the primal material of the universe taking living form, vast and ancient and unshapen by any divine will. He was the raw stuff of everything, before everything knew what it was. And as Ymir lay in the void, another creature emerged from the melting ice alongside him, a cow, enormous and strange, called Authumbla. This detail comes to us from Snorri's Gylfaginning specifically. The older Eddic poetry does not give her a prominent role in the creation. But in Snorri's account she is essential, and her act is extraordinary. Authumbla nourished Ymir with her milk, and she herself was nourished by something stranger still. She licked the salt ice of Ginnungagap, not out of hunger, the ancient sources give us no such explanation, but because something within the ice required releasing. On the first day she licked, and the outline of hair appeared in the surface of the frost. On the second day she licked, and the shape of a head emerged. On the third day, fully revealed, a figure stepped free of the ice entirely. His name was Buri. He was the first god. From him came Bor, his son. From Bor and the giantess Bestla, herself of giant blood, came 3 brothers, Odin and Vili and Ve. Consider what the Norse tradition is encoding here in this genealogy of the divine. The gods are not separate from the primal world, they are descended from it. Odin's mother was a giantess. The force that will one day build and sustain the universe is made, in part, from the same primordial stuff as the enemies of order and the darkness before creation. The enmity between gods and giants that runs through every story of the Norse cosmos. Through every wolf chained on a rock, every battle at the end of the world, begins here, in the blood that both share and the choice that divided them. Because Odin and his brothers looked at Ymir, the first being, the vast and ancient source from which more giants had already begun to multiply, emerging from his body as he slept, and they made a decision. They killed him. The blood that poured from Ymir's body was so immense that every giant in existence drowned in it, save 2 who survived to carry their kind forward, to carry the feud forward toward Ragnarok. And then the 3 brothers lifted the body of the first being into the void and began, with the deliberate attention of craftsmen, to build. The oldest poems in the Norse tradition give us the exact inventory of this cosmic butchery. In Grimnismal and Vafthrûthnismal, among the most ancient surviving verse in the poetic Edda, the transformation is laid out with the directness of something told so many times it has worn down to bone. The flesh of Ymir became the earth. His blood became the seas and the lakes and the rivers. Which is why, in the Norse understanding, the world is not merely surrounded by water, but is water at its deepest level, the blood of the thing from which it was made. His bones became the mountains. His teeth and the shards of his shattered frame became the rocks and the pebbles of the shore. His skull, lifted by the 3 brothers and arched above the newly made earth, became the sky. Snorri's Gylfaginning adds the final details of this accounting. His brains scattered across that sky to become the clouds, and his eyebrows fashioned into a wall, a boundary encircling the middle region of the world, the place where humans would one day live. They called that enclosed region Midgard. The world is a body. Sit with that. Not as metaphor, not as poetic language, but as the cosmological conviction of the people who told this story. When you stand on a mountain, you stand on bone. When you sail a sea, you sail on blood. The Norse universe did not begin with a divine word, with a thought, with a dream. It began with a killing, and everything that followed was made from what remained. This is not a creation from nothing. It is a creation from something, from the violent transformation of primal material into structured, purposeful form. The world was not spoken into being. It was built. From the destruction of the first being came even the craftsmen of the underground. Here the sources diverge in a way that is itself revealing. Snorri tells us that maggots formed in the body of Ymir and were given minds and the shapes of small men, sent into the earth as dwarves, the makers of Gleipnir and Mjolnir, and the greatest tools of the divine age, born of decomposition and gifted with the art of creation. But the older Völuspá describes something different. the dwarves shaped from the blood of a primal giant, and the pulverized remnants of his bones, not maggots, but matter, the dust and ichor of the first being reconstituted into a new kind of life. The tradition does not fully agree with itself. What every version shares is the principle. Even the craftsmen of the cosmos were made from the wreckage of Ymir, built from the same violent starting point as everything else. Through this new violent world a tree grew, Yggdrasil, vast, ancient, and alive in ways that stone and water are not. At its roots lay the wells that anchored reality, the well of fate, where the three Norns wove time itself, dipping their cloths in the water and laying them against the bark to keep the tree living. The well of wisdom, holding knowledge so deep and so old that Odin would one day trade his eye to drink from it, and a third, well plunging into the frozen dark of the dead. Yggdrasil was a living ecosystem, and it was already at war with itself. An eagle watched from the crown, its vision encompassing all the realms at once. The dragon Nithhoga tore at the roots below, gnawing with the patience of something that has nowhere else to be. And between them, the squirrel Ratatoska scrambled up and down the bark, carrying messages, carrying insults, the running commentary of a cosmos in which even the tree's own occupants could not manage peace. The world was built, but it was empty. Walking the shoreline of the Blood Sea, the gods found 2 logs of driftwood washed up on the new earth, an ash tree and an elm lying inert on the sand, shapeless and without purpose. They bent over the wood and gave it what it lacked. The Völuspá, one of the oldest surviving Norse poems, written down in the Codex Regius around 1270 CE from a tradition likely centuries older still, calls the gifts Ond, Otha, and Litu Gotha, breath or spirit, inspired consciousness, and the warm flush of living colour. Who exactly stood on that beach remains a fractured memory. Snorri names Odin and his brothers Vili and Ve, while the Völuspá names Odin alongside 2 other figures, Hoynir and the mysterious Lothor, whose identity scholars have debated for generations without resolution. But the outcome is the same. The wood took a breath. It stood up. These were Ask and Embla, the first man and the first woman, parents of everyone who would ever stand on the earth that was made from a giant's flesh, and look up at the sky that was made from his skull. There is a particular kind of human courage that the Norse mythological tradition understood better than almost any other. It is the courage of knowing that everything ends, knowing it, naming it, carving it into the bones of creation, and building anyway. The Norse creation is not a declaration of permanence. From the moment Yggdrasil was planted, Nithhoga was already gnawing at its roots. From the moment the gods shaped Asgard above Midgard and laid the Bifrost Bridge across the sky, the Norns were already weaving the fates that would end in fire and flood and wolf. This is not a universe designed to last forever. It is a universe designed to last exactly long enough to be beautiful and purposeful and fully inhabited, and then to end in the blaze the Völuspá prophesied in the same breath it used to describe creation. What does it mean that the people who built the great halls of the north, who sailed into waters no one had mapped, who carved their gods into wood and stone and song, what does it mean that they told themselves this story about where the world came from? That they began with a void, passed through a giant's body, and ended with a tree already trembling at its roots, not with despair, with the quiet, steady courage of those who understand that the value of a thing is not diminished by its ending, that the world, made from the body of the first being, carrying within its structure the foreknowledge of its own unmade state, is not lesser for being temporary. It is more precious. The Norns are at the well now. The eagle is in the crown of the tree. The dragon is at the roots, as it was at the beginning, as it will be at the end. Midgard sits at the center of the world, enclosed in the brow of the first being, filled with the children of Ask and Embla, filled with their fires and their stories and their brief and radiant lives. Yggdrasil holds all of it. And if you listen, past the sound of the wind in its branches, past the distant crack of ice and the low roar of fire at the edges of the world, you can hear, just barely, the gnawing at the roots. This legend has been told. Subscribe and return to Aeonkeep. More legends await.